All right. Good afternoon, everyone. You are at the briefing, Sierra Club Pennsylvania's series of live legislative updates. Today is a special edition about Pennsylvania's political landscape. My name is Melissa Farr, she, her pronouns. I'm the senior distributed organizer for the chapter and facilitator for the series. You're going to primarily hear from Jen Quinn, our legislative and political director, and then also joining us today is Nate Regal, our clean energy program advocate. This recording and slides will be sent out in the next 24 hours or so. We also have our notes document called the Briefing Digest. It has not really been updated for this particular session because it's a little bit of a different angle that we're taking today, aren't really new action items. And so you're welcome to take a look at it for, what we offered in the previous session, but you won't see any radical changes on the Briefing Digest. Do keep yourself on mute while Jen is presenting. There will be time for questions at the end. And with that, I will pass it over to Jen.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. As Melissa mentioned, this will largely be political focused. When I initially put this together, it was supposed to be entirely political focused, and then the governor released his executive order last week, and so I thought we would be remiss if we did not cover that. All right. Can folks see my screen? I hope they can. All right, I will move forward unless somebody starts yelling that they cannot see my screen. So where things stand politically, at least, we'll start there. So most of you know Governor Shapiro has a pretty commanding lead in all of the polls. This paragraph here, I think, did come from the Cook Political Report. An approval rating consistently around 60%, gargantuan cash on hand, decisive polling lead over Stacey Garrity, making it almost impossible to see him coming up short in his request for a second term. All polling that we have available to us and that I've seen shows Shapiro with a commanding lead. He leads by 7 to 15 points in all of the House districts that have been polled except HD 72, which is out near Johnstown. Trump is underwater in all districts that have been polled except HD 72. So we are, by all accounts, expecting Josh Shapiro to pretty easily win the upcoming election. Now, the legislature is where it gets sort of interesting. And the question that we're all hearing is, will there be a trifecta, right? Will we have Governor Shapiro as well as like a Democratic House and Senate? So currently, the Senate has 27 Republicans, 23 Democrats this past legislative session. It's where, all good bills go to die. The House, as of 2 weeks ago, was 102, 101, but there was a special election north of Pittsburgh, out in Cranberry Township, that actually gave the House a two-seat majority. Brandon Dukes was able to flip a seat. If folks remember Darrell Metcalf, the former ERE chair, who was a very colorful character, that was a seat that flipped during a special election, somewhat unexpectedly, in a district that I think Trump had maybe a plus 12 or a plus 17. So people are feeling optimistic. Pollsters are feeling optimistic. Now, I think we've all kind of been misled by polls before, so I would take this with a grain of salt, but I can share, what I've heard and why people are feeling optimistic. So, of Pennsylvania residents who were polled, 87% of Democrats versus 73% of Republicans are extremely motivated to vote in November. 94% of Democrats would vote for just the generic Democrat in their district versus 89% of Republicans who would do the same. Again, just with a generic candidate, who are you going to vote for? Now, a named ballot where you're actually having the name of the House candidate on there, Democrats are leading 46 to 44% there. And people are generally unhappy with the Trump administration. I don't think that's news to anyone. But a lot of folks are believing that, the wind is at the backs of, folks who could go to the legislature and be environmental champions, right? All of the pieces are sort of falling in line, and the polls are pointing in the right direction. So there's a lot of optimism about gaining ground in the House and gaining ground in the Senate. Again, when it comes to electing people who will actually vote the right way when it comes to the environment. So the next few slides are going to have a little metric called DPI. And I just want to flag for folks and define what DPI is before I start talking about it. So DPI is the Democratic Performance Index. It's essentially a benchmark for how the average Democrat should perform in that district, right? So what percentage of the votes should just the average generic Democratic candidate get in this district? And it's just a good baseline when it comes to prioritizing races and determining, where folks are going to put efforts and what is a priority race and what isn't for sort of the larger funders in the state. So we can look at this and I'll give you some examples of DPI. So for the state house, these are the priority races right now, or some of the priority races, or at least the top tier priority races. So the first one is Bucks County. Folks know Bucks County is a very swingy place currently. Casey Tomlinson is the incumbent Republican. Brian Allen is challenging her. The DPI there is 51.6%. So we could expect the average generic Democrat to get 51.6% of the votes. So on paper, Democrats should win that seat, right? It doesn't always hold true, but when you have a really good candidate or a scandal or a ton of money pouring in, all those things can influence that. But on paper, this is just the metric we use. So Allegheny County, District 44 is another priority seat. Valerie Gatos and Hadley Hawes, if folks remember, Hadley Hawes ran in 2024. DPI there is 49.5%. In District 88 in Cumberland County, Jeff Clark is going up against Sarah Agerton. This is an open seat. Cheryl Delosier held the seat for a long time. She finally retired. Sarah Agerton ran in 2022 and 2024, was unable to defeat the incumbent. But perhaps now that this is an open seat, she has a better chance of winning. Then in Luzerne County, this is another open seat. This was the Eddie Dave Pashinsky seat in the Wilkes-Barre area. He held the seat for a few decades. We now have two new candidates there. DPI is 54.1%, so we would expect a Democrat to win that seat pretty easily. Again, we'll see if that's true. In the Lehigh Valley, Joe Emmerich versus Jeff Warren, 50.9% DPI. Another Bucks County seat, Joe Hogan versus Kristen Egan. If folks remember, I think Hogan won the seat in 2024 by 43 votes. So again, Bucks County, the races are always extremely tight there. And then Chester and Delaware County, a repeat of 2024, incumbent Craig Williams versus Elizabeth Morrow. And then the Tim Hayes race in Bucks County, Shelby Labs. This was a tier 2 race. I added it here at the bottom here. It's not in a numerical order, but this was a tier 2 race. But due to the hard work that Tim Hayes is putting in, knocking doors and raising money, it has become a tier 1 race. And again, Bucks County is always tough. DPI here, not as good as some of these other races. But again, if you have an outstanding candidate, they can sort of bump that up and change that. So again, priority House races as of August. And then seats to defend in the House, Ryan Bizzaro out in Erie, Rob Matzey out in Beaver County. This has become a tougher and tougher race every year, 51.7 DPI. An open seat out in Allegheny County with Brittany Blome. I think this is the open Anita Kulik seat, who is retiring. Central Pennsylvania, Paul Takak. I don't have DPI for everyone, but most candidates. I don't have it for Takak here. And then Jim Haddock in Luzerne and Lackawanna County, another defense seat as northeastern PA becomes more and more red. Brian Monroe in Bucks County. This is always a tough seat. Always a lot of work goes into defending that. 2024 was the same because again, Bucks County is always tough. And then Frank Burns out in central Pennsylvania, I think the Altoona, Johnstown area. Frank Burns, according to the math on the paper, it's a 39.3% DPI. He should not have that seat, but he does. He's held it for a long time. Folks know him. He's a Democrat in a very red area. He often votes like a Republican, so he's able to hold that seat, but it's always a risk. And lately it's become a much, much riskier seat where a lot more time and effort has to be invested to hold that seat, especially with a DPI of below 40%. And then for the Senate, again, Bucks County, always up for grabs. We have Frank Ferry, who won the seat. He's a long-term state house member. I think he won this in 2022. The opponent is Eileen Albalar, 48.8% DPI. And then again in the Lehigh Valley, Nick Miller is up against Maldonado, 53%. That should be a seat that Nick Miller can hold, but it is deemed a competitive seat. Mark Pinsley challenging Jarrett Coleman again in the Lehigh Valley and Bucks County. Mark has run for this seat, I think, twice previously, so a lot of experience running. He's very confident he can win it this time, but we'll see if things have shifted enough for him to pull it off this time. And then District 24 in Berks and Montgomery County, the incumbent Tracy Pennycook is up against Chris Thomas. James Malone in Lancaster County, he won the seat in a special election. This was a very red seat held by Senator Ament for quite a long time. He was able to flip it blue for maybe the first time ever in a very, very long time. You can see the DPI is very low there. There are some concerns if he will be able to hold that seat or not. And then the last Senate seat we're looking at is again Lackawanna, Monroe, Wayne. Not quite the Lehigh Valley, but northeastern PA going down into east central Pennsylvania. Again, leaning right. Rosemary Brown, the incumbent, very slightly favored there, at least on paper, against Brian Wrightson. So these are the races that folks are prioritizing right now in Pennsylvania when it comes to time, effort, resources. Our endorsements include most of these folks. You can use this link to check them out on our website. And I think, yes, that was the last bit for the political. I can take a moment here if folks want to have any questions about the political aspect before we switch to talking about the governor's executive order. Any questions on any of the political landscape we've discussed? Oh, go ahead, Howard.
Yeah, who in the Senate would you recommend we work for? Um, it just seems more logical to focus on the Senate than the House. I could be wrong in that.
I mean, I think it depends on, where you are and sort of what you want to do. Like if you're wanting to do something locally, I don't think there's anyone super close to you, Howard, but Bucks could be the way, but there's always campaigns that are looking for folks to do like phone banking remotely or postcard writing. But I mean, really it's your choice. You can look at the math and see the ones that, need to be defended are the ones that are most likely to flip, right? Like we can see 49.7 and 50.1 are probably races that, some additional effort might help to actually flip those. But I can't really say, these are where the efforts are being focused now. But I'd suggest visit the websites of these folks and see where they align with you and where you want to put your time and your effort.
Thank you.
Yeah, Yvette?
I'm not just saying it because Mark's my friend. I'm actually doing all the talking and canvassing and phone banking and everything. And I'm talking to people. Nobody likes Coleman. He doesn't talk to anybody. And I talk to both of them, Coleman and Mark Pinsley. So we want to replace Jarrett Coleman with Mark Pinsley. He's doing really well. I think those numbers may even be low. Um, the ads are ridiculous, and everybody knows it's bull crap lies about that Jarrett's putting out. And they really want Mark right now, and we really want to flip that seat. Nick Miller, I love him. He's kind of like, we want to make sure he gets reelected, but he's doing pretty good. They like him there. So Mark's the one we need to flip because we got to get that seat, but we do want to hold on to the other seats. But I am watching a bunch of them. I love Tim Hayes, but he does have a lot of catching up there. He's in a bad spot. I feel sorry for him. I'm helping somebody else north of me also. He's south of me. And now they have some house races that are hard to win there. Bucks is tough. They,
It
I know.
is, yes.
I know, but yeah, but Mark has a good chance, and he's getting some help through PA coordinated 2026. We have a bunch of the people have yard signs in the offices right in that Allentown building, and he actually got some help from other groups and even with the governor. So we want to flip that seat so we don't have the gridlock anymore. So we really are like he said, we should focus on the Senate to get stuff through. Um, that is a good spot that even Shapiro's helping him.
Great. Thank you,
That's
Yvette.
a good one.
Any other questions on the political side? Otherwise, we can get into the executive order. All right, I will jump into the executive order. I think most folks are aware last week, I think on Tuesday, the governor announced his data center executive order. It's an interesting step, a big step. I can just go over some of the details. Again, these aren't all of the details, but I think it's a concise overview of a good chunk of the details. So it applies to data centers over 25 megawatts. Developers sign a consent order. That link there is live. You can see the actual consent order and what it says and the requirements in there, agreeing to the governor's grid requirements. If folks remember House Bill 2650, we talked about that. That codified the grid requirements, so it shouldn't be unfamiliar to you, but you can also use that link to review the grid requirements. They focus basically on a few buckets, right? Energy, local communities and workforce development, transparency, environmental issues. And these developers are given two paths, right? You can choose path one or you can choose path two. Path one, it seems to be the obvious better path. So these folks get their permits reviewed on a rolling basis, but they still need local zoning and land use approvals before state permits are issued. And the projects must also be consistent with the local comprehensive plan. And these projects are eligible for the already existing permit processing timeline guarantees that the state offers. Path two, if you decide you do not want to sign the consent order and you do not want to comply with the grid requirements, DEP will not even begin reviewing your applications until all local land use and zoning approvals are complete and water withdrawal and discharge authorizations are also approved. And no permit timeline guarantees will go for these projects. So it's either, a year or 18 months of the typical grind of getting your permits or a very long slog of, maybe getting your permits down the road. So very clearly trying to entice people to choose path one. And so the executive order also removes all data centers from the state's fast track permitting program. I don't know why anyone thought that was a good idea to begin with, but they are all now removed from fast track permitting. It also bans non-disclosure agreements with any state agency under the governor's purview. So all the executive agencies cannot enter into NDAs. And if you do not sign the consent order, you are not eligible for the existing sales and use tax exemption. So again, another carrot or stick there, however you want to look at it, enticing folks to sign the consent order. As far as environmental issues, they must use a certain percentage of clean, firm energy, 10% by 2030. That increases over time, going to 32% by 2035. Buildings over 100,000 square feet must be solar ready. It requires cleaner backup generators, the tier 4 diesel backup generators. It also limits runtimes. And existing data centers must begin reporting their annual energy and water usage starting by 2027. And then for consumer protections, data centers must fully pay the cost of all grid upgrades, so new transmission, distribution, and generation, and not be passing that along to the rest of us. They have to agree to bring their own power, either build, buy, or secure that, so that the increased demand does not drive up the PJM auction prices, which has been happening over the past year or so. And then data centers are curtailed first during grid emergencies. This isn't happening yet, but it is contingent on PUC rules and orders. So the governor's special counsel will be working with PUC to hopefully get that finalized, that data centers are curtailed during grid emergencies, not our power or the hospital's power. And so that is the EO in a nutshell. I can stop sharing my screen. If folks have questions about the executive order, happy to chat about those, or if there are just other questions you might have.
And if folks want to use the raise hand function or put your question in the chat, we will call on you on the order they're received. Please keep it 2 questions because we only have 10 minutes or so, and there might be a lot of you that want to speak. So, all right. So the first hand I see is Dale. Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, hi. Is there anything about water, bringing your own water? I've seen that some people are agreeing to that. How do you bring your own water to a data center?
I don't know. I haven't heard bring your own water, but I do know there are water reporting requirements, water management requirements. I think the state water plan might be in there. So there are water water usage and water management requirements in the executive order. I can't recall them off the top of my head, but I'm not familiar with the bring your own water.
Yeah, I just
Uh,
read that somewhere, another state, not here. But so does have some restrictions on local water use or how
yes,
that
there are
works.
standards for water usage in the executive order. Yes, you can, like I said, you can click on. So the executive order is just 8 pages of pretty general things, but the consent order is the detailed, um, the explicit sort of what they're requiring folks to agree to. So there are portions that relate to water usage, yes.
Okay.
Oop, you're muted, Melissa.
Sorry, I am muted. In the chat, Janice asks, what is the enforcement mechanism if the use of water exceeds what is allowed?
I would have to review that for you. I don't know where they're setting the limits, but again, I would have to review the actual enforcement mechanisms for water. It may be, a permit, it may be a fine, a permit violation or a fine. Again, I am not an expert on every piece of the executive order. I apologize, but I can look at it and follow up with folks.
Okay, and then Dave.
Thanks, Jen. Does the executive order require anything related to local public input or comment? I may have missed it. Maybe you mentioned that.
Yeah, so transparency is a big part of it. So permits would not be issued without local approval. So the local process would still have to unfold with zoning, any sort of ordinance changes, the compliance with the comprehensive plan. So there should be a significant amount of input at the local level since DEP issuing permits is contingent upon local approval.
All right, I'm seeing also in the chat, having access to if the data centers are stopped from having access to the grid. Janice, do you want to, is this two separate questions or one together? Are you able to come off and just one? Okay.
I think I get it. It's about data. It's if so. Data centers would not be powered solely by diesel generators ever. That would be so expensive. But with curtailment, or if there is like an emergency order from PJM, they would very likely be allowed to switch to backup power. So that would sort of lower the peak demand, take them off of the grid, but they would switch to diesel backup power. But again, that's typical only under emergency orders from PJM. Does that answer your question? I think that's what you're after.
Awesome. And then Diana, is the executive order effective now? If my municipality has no data center ordinance, does the state rule apply? If my municipality soon adopts its own zoning regarding data centers, are my muni's zonings, which may be stricter, to apply?
So I'm pretty sure it's effective now. There are portions of it that will involve like DEP likely promulgating new regulations, but um, it should apply if your municipality adopts something stricter. I think that should still be fine unless you're like violating state law somehow. But as far as normal municipal authority and what they cover with like setbacks and noise and lighting, um, you would be able to adopt that. That's really not addressed in the executive order. They're sort of allowing municipalities to do what they typically do as far as like legal oversight. But it's contingent. Like again, I mentioned this to Dave, the permit being issued is contingent on local approval, right? So if your local approval passes the muster and isn't challenged for being too restrictive, then permits can be issued. But if this project does not secure local approvals, then the permits are not issued. So, yes, I think it can be somewhat stricter because there's not a lot of overlap when it comes to what the state is regulating and what municipalities typically regulate. And then Shapiro's executive order is the threshold. I'm not really sure what you mean by the threshold, but it is all we have at the state level right now to regulate data centers. He had to use executive authority because the legislature was unwilling or unable to pass the multiple data center bills that are out there. I mean, the House passed some of them, the Senate refused. So he used the authority he has to try to regulate them through executive authority. So this is what Pennsylvania has to regulate data centers. There's a lot of concern that it will be challenged because it is a very expansive use of executive authority. But, right now we're happy to have something on the books and for someone to be taking data centers seriously.
Michael.
Yeah, there, I recall there was a lot of language about ordinances. And I don't know, Jen, I don't know if you can comment. Does an executive order supersede any Pennsylvania laws about how ordinances can be crafted and implemented by local municipalities?
So the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Code sort of limits, right? You can't be so restrictive in your zoning that it's like a de facto ban, right? And if something is a legitimate use, then it has to be sort of allowed. It's why we're having these curative amendments. I don't see the executive order as really trying to interfere or supersede, right? Municipalities tend not to deal with grid interconnections, right? They tend not to deal um, with a whole host of things, right? But they do tend to deal with how things impact local communities, right? Like they can require a water usage agreement if it's like if it's a municipal water supply. They can require noise limits and setbacks, and they can work for a community benefits agreement. But I look at the executive order as sort of a higher level, right? It's doing broader strokes. It has, workforce development requirements. It has, all the consumer protections. It has, DEP looking at emissions from backup generators, and municipalities just typically don't do that. Now, will there be friction that comes up? Possibly. But right now, it's so new, we haven't seen or heard anything like that. And everything I've heard about challenges are probably coming from the data center side at this point and not the local municipalities at this point.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we've got 2 minutes. Any final questions? Whoop, I got lots of stuff coming up in the chat. And who and with what basis will challenge the executive order?
I mean, my guess is that it would be the data center developers and that it would be, it's a stretch, right? Like the executive order is saying if you want these permits from DEP, you have to, do things related to energy or a community benefits agreement or workforce development. That's a stretch, right? Making an environmental permit contingent on things that are not related to the environment is a bit of a stretch. Having the sort of using the tax break, right? That's as like a carrot and a stick here. The legislature refused to act on that, and now they're again making certain things contingent on that through an executive order, right? We have a law that exists for the tax break that doesn't include that. So I think folks can say, like, is that a stretch too? So it's really just the stretch of like what is legal, who wants to challenge it. I don't know if data centers really want to come out there and challenge this and be the bad guy since they're already the bad guy, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right, folks, we are at time. If you have any additional questions or comments, please feel free to email them. You can look forward to seeing this recording and the slides in your email in the next day or so. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.